A teenage queen, an extravagant figure, a political pawn turned into a national scapegoat. She was trapped between a political system that was perhaps too judgmental and a lifestyle that was perhaps too decadent.
Behind the silk gowns, powdered wigs, and endless rituals of Versailles was a young woman navigating a life she never chose. One where every move was watched and every mistake became legend. It's tragic, really, how someone's identity can be constructed and destroyed entirely by others. What happens to a person when expectations constantly define their image?
In today's episode, we will uncover the secrets behind the life of France's last queen, Marie Antoinette. Her story isn't just one of royalty or revolution, but of identity and endurance. History reduced her to 4 infamous words she never even said: "Let them eat cake." But the truth is far more complex.
Born in Vienna in 1755, Maria Antonia Anna Josepha was the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa and Emperor Franz Stephen. Her father adored her, but her mother was strict, almost impossibly demanding. She grew up craving approval, even tracing her governess' pencil work in ink just to appear perfect. It's striking how early she learned to equate love with performance.
Alfred Adler was an Austrian psychologist from the early 20th century. According to his birth order theory, being one of 15 children would have made her constantly fight for recognition. Adler believed that our place in the family hierarchy shapes our deepest motivations. And for later born children, especially the youngest, that often means developing charm, sociability, or performance as tools for attention.
Yeah, he argued that this constant striving to overcome feelings of inferiority, known as the inferiority complex, becomes a central force in shaping one's personality and behavior. Her extremely social personality could be an indicator of how she craved attention when her poor schoolwork and lack of focus failed to satisfy her mother.
Soon, tragedy struck. When she was 7, smallpox took the lives of her sister Maria and her sister-in-law Isabella. Then at just 10, her father died suddenly of a stroke during her brother's wedding celebrations. Her mother came home draped in black, marking the end of her carefree childhood. Grief and discipline replaced affection, shaping a child into a symbol of duty.
That transformation became complete when she was chosen to marry the heir to the French throne. She was drilled in French, taught court manners, and trained to embody perfection. Every smile, every movement was rehearsed under scrutiny. She wasn't being educated, she was being sculpted into a political ideal. By 14, she left home forever to become France's future queen, stepping into a foreign strange rule that would one day stab her in the back.
Arriving at Versailles must have been overwhelming. 15 years old, married to Louis, shy, awkward, and more interested in locks and hunting than love and ruling. She was thrown into a world where even the simplest actions were publicly displayed. Every word, every breath was judged. Her value was tied to one thing: producing an heir. It's no wonder, according to Erik Erikson's theory of adolescence, she began to lose her sense of self so early because in the early stage of growing up, her identity was stolen from her.
She wanted to sparkle in front of the court to appeal to the public, but she needed an escape, which became the Petit Trianon, a small estate where she built a simpler world. It was like a sanctuary to her, a place where she could exist unobserved and unjudged, away from the world's expectations. This was called escapism, a term coined by John Grove Ransom. Marie Antoinette used the Petit Trianon as a way of survival, disguised as simplicity, a place where she could finally breathe, even if only in illusion. The irony is that what the world condemned as frivolity may have been the only thing keeping her sane.
So at first, she adapted. She smiled, charmed, played her role, but the court was merciless. Her friendships became scandals, her laughter became arrogance, and her youth became ammunition against her. Carl Jung, a Swiss psychologist, would say she became consumed by her persona, the glittering mask we wear to satisfy the world's expectations. Behind the glitter, though, was a girl suffocating under performance.
While she was seeking calm in her gardens, France was collapsing under its own grandeur. The economy was in ruins, bread prices doubled, and by 1789 the average Parisian spent almost 80% of their income on bread. The people couldn't see the faceless systems that failed them, but they could see the face of Marie Antoinette framed in pearls.
That's when the venom began. The libels, scandalous pamphlets that turned her into a monster. Some of the most vicious ones came from writers like Devino de Morand, a professional scandal monger who printed his attacks from London. His letters accused the Queen of everything from secret affairs to Austrian treason, pure fabrication but devastating in their effect. Historian Robert Darnton called them the pornography of politics.
Her image was mutilated by rumor until she became Madame Deficit, the nation's scapegoat. The irony? She had far less political power than anyone believed. Gustave Le Bon's work on crowd psychology explains this perfectly. When emotion overtakes reason, myths start to feel truer than facts.
And then came the words that would define her legacy. If they have no bread, let them eat cake. No document ever recorded her saying it. The phrase had appeared decades earlier, attributed to other royals. But by the time the bread riots began, it didn't matter whether it was true. It felt true.
To the starving poor, the idea of their queen dismissing their hunger with such cruelty captured everything they wanted to believe about her. And in that collective illusion, she stopped being human and became the embodiment of France's rage.
Austrian by birth, detached by privilege, and silent at the worst possible moment. Psychologically, that must have been devastating. Her lifelong need for validation was shattered overnight. The woman who once tried so hard to please everyone was now the enemy of all. It's a terrifying transformation from adored to despised. It says more about society's hunger for villains than it does about her.
And then came the revolution. The world that once bowed before her now spat her name. The glittering queen became a prisoner, confined to cold stone walls in the temple. She watched her husband executed, her children taken from her, and her reputation twisted into a national nightmare. Her son, the little Dauphin, died alone in captivity, while her daughter was left to carry the weight of the family name in exile. She likely experienced situational depression, sadness, withdrawal, hopelessness. But she endured it with the only tools she had: fantasy, beauty, and distraction.
Her letters from prison are haunting. Gone is the frivolous movement of public imagination. Instead, we see tenderness, clarity, and even forgiveness. She writes not about revenge, but about her children's soul, her faith, and her dignity. Just hours before her execution on October 16, 1793, she wrote to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, "I am calm, as people are whose conscience is clear. I am deeply grieved at leaving my poor children. You know that I lived only for them, and for you."
It's chilling in its quiet composure, the voice of a woman stripped of everything, yet still clinging to dignity and love. In psychological terms, this feels like the integration of the shadow that Jung described, when the fragmented parts of the self finally reconcile into wholeness. Perhaps she achieved individuation, the moment a person becomes fully themselves. Stripped of crowns, silk, and illusion, she found authenticity in suffering.
Behind all the accusations, there clearly had been a woman unraveling. The same woman accused of arrogance now faced death with humility. When the blade fell in 1793, she was no longer the monster of pamphlets or the saint of sympathizers, just Marie, finally herself.
That's perhaps her quiet redemption. After years of being misunderstood, she rediscovered her dignity in the very act of losing everything. She began her story as a symbol, and she ended it as a person.
When the world saw a queen, they forgot the girl who only wanted to be understood. Marie Antoinette lived and died performing a role written by others, too heavy for anyone to bear. And maybe the real tragedy isn't that she lost her crown, but that she never got to simply be Marie.
Before her death, she wrote, "Courage, I have shown it for years. Do you think I shall lose it at the moment when my sufferings are to end?" That final act of defiance wasn't about politics. It was about reclaiming her voice, her grace, her identity. And perhaps that's what remains of her legacy, a reminder that identity isn't what the world sees.
It's what remains when the world stops looking.